Hey there. Tonight we're diving deep beneath the waves, not to palaces of marble or temples of gold alone, but to a realm where the water meets the sky, where storms are born and sailors pray. We're following the entire story of Poseidon, the god who held the ocean in his palm and the earth beneath his feet. You'll drift through the life of the earthshaker himself, from the moment he was born into a world of fear and darkness, through wars that shook the foundations of existence, to the endless depths where he ruled with trident in hand. You'll meet the nymphs who fled from him, the heroes who earned his wrath, and the cities that rose and fell at his whim. You'll hear about love that was complicated, rage that lasted decades, and power that could reshape coastlines with a single blow. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it actually brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's strangely comforting to know who else is out there, falling asleep to these old stories of gods and mortals. So close your eyes. Let the sound of distant waves wash over you. Let the myths unfold like foam on the shore. And let's begin at the very beginning, before Poseidon was a god, before he was anything at all. The birth in darkness. Before Poseidon commanded the seas, before his name echoed across the Mediterranean, before sailors whispered prayers to him in the dark of storm-tossed nights, he was simply a child, not a golden child of prophecy, not yet a god of thunder and tide, just an infant born into the worst possible circumstances, to parents who were themselves divine, ancient, and deeply, catastrophically paranoid. His mother was Rhea, a titan of immense power, associated with fertility, motherhood, and the flowing of time itself. She was patient, loving, and trapped in a marriage that brought her nothing but grief. His father was Cronus, the lord of the cosmos, who had seized power from his own father Uranus in an act of calculated violence that would haunt him for the rest of his reign. Cronus ruled during what would later be called the Golden Age, though for their children, there was nothing golden about it at all. Cronus had a problem. Well, several problems, but one stood out above all others. He had received a prophecy, as one does when one is a Titan king, that one of his children would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his father. This was inconvenient. Cronus had no intention of relinquishing power. He had fought for it, bled for it, and committed acts he preferred not to dwell on. So when Rhea gave birth to their first child, Hestia, Cronus did what any reasonable paranoid tyrant would do. He swallowed her whole. Not in a metaphorical sense, not symbolically. He opened his mouth and consumed his newborn daughter, trapping her in the dark cavity of his body where time moved strangely and hope went to die. When Rhea protested, tears streaming down her face, hands reaching for the child she'd carried and birthed and held for mere moments, Cronus explained his reasoning with the cold logic of fear. Better to imprison them than to risk being destroyed by them. Better to keep them close, in the most literal sense possible, than to let them grow into threats. And so it continued. Child after child, Rhea gave birth, and child after child, Cronus swallowed. Demeter, goddess of harvest and growth, who would one day make crops flourish across the earth, vanished into the dark before she could draw a second breath. Hera, who would one day rule Olympus as queen, was consumed before she could cry out. Hades, future lord of the underworld, silent and solemn even as an infant, disappeared down his father's throat without a sound. Then came Poseidon. In most tellings of the story, Poseidon met the same fate as his siblings, Rhea held him, perhaps for just a moment, felt the weight of him in her arms, the warmth of new life against her chest, looked into eyes that already held the color of deep water. And then she watched as Cronus took him and swallowed him whole. Down into the darkness he went, to join his sisters and brother in that strange, timeless prison within their father's body. There in the belly of Cronus, Poseidon grew. Not as mortal children grow, with time and food and sunlight, but as gods grow, with power accumulating like sediment at the bottom of the sea, with fury building like pressure beneath the earth. He was aware, in whatever way divine children are aware, that this was not how things should be, that outside this prison of flesh and fear, there was a world, that he had been born to walk in it, to breathe its air, to feel its rain and wind and light. But instead, he was here, trapped, waiting, growing stronger and angrier with every moment that passed. But there's another version of the story, one that's whispered less often, but carries its own weight of truth. In this telling, Rhea had learned from her previous losses. By the time Poseidon was born, she had prepared. She had made plans. She had found allies among the ancient powers of the world, those who remembered what it was like before Cronus ruled with such iron fear, who whispered that tyranny, even divine tyranny, should not go unchallenged. In this version, when Poseidon was born, Rhea didn't bring him to Cronus at all. Instead, she wrapped him carefully in soft cloth and carried him away in secret. She took him to Arcadia, to rolling hills where sheep grazed and the air smelled of grass and distant rain, and she hid him among a flock of lambs. The shepherds there, whether they knew what they guarded or simply accepted the mysterious child left in their care, watched over him as he grew. Or perhaps she took him farther, across the sea to Rhodes, that sun-drenched island where the water sparkles like scattered jewels, and left him in the care of Capheira, daughter of the ancient Titan, Oceanus, and the Telchines, those mysterious craftsmen who worked magic into metal and knew secrets older than the Olympians. To fool Cronus, Rhea presented him with a foal, a young horse wrapped in swaddling clothes, small enough to pass for an infant if one didn't look too closely. And Cronus, in his haste and confidence and terrible certainty that he knew what was happening, swallowed it without question. The irony would become apparent later, when Poseidon became known as the creator and patron of horses, when his connection to those magnificent beasts became one of his defining characteristics. But at the time, it was simply a desperate mother's trick to save her son. Whichever version is true, and perhaps in the strange logic of myths, both are true in their own way, the result was the same. Poseidon survived his infancy. He grew from child to youth, to a being of such power that the sea itself would one day recognize him as its master. But his childhood, whether spent in darkness within his father or hidden among mortals and lesser gods, shaped him in ways that would echo through eternity. If he was trapped in Cronus's belly, he learned what it meant to be imprisoned. He learned what it meant to be denied freedom by someone who should have protected him. He learned the weight of fear, the price of survival, and the slow accumulation of rage that builds when you're powerless, but not helpless, when you know that someday, somehow, things will change and you will make them change. The darkness taught him patience, but it also taught him fury. If he was hidden away, raised in secret while his siblings suffered, he learned guilt. He learned that he had been spared while others hadn't, that his mother had chosen to save him and not the others, or perhaps hadn't yet learned how when they were born. He learned what it meant to be separate, To grow up knowing you had family you'd never met, siblings who were alive but might as well be dead, trapped in a prison you'd escaped through luck or timing, or your mother's love. The separation taught him to value freedom, but it also taught him loneliness. Either way, he learned rage. A quiet, patient rage that would simmer beneath his surface like volcanic vents beneath the ocean floor, invisible from above, but powerful enough to reshape the seabed. It was the kind of rage that doesn't explode quickly and burn out, the kind that waits, that plans, that remembers every injustice and stores it away for later, the kind that, when finally unleashed, doesn't just destroy its target, but reshapes the world around it. That rage, that patience, that deep well of fury at being wronged before he even had the chance to do anything wrong, would define Poseidon for the rest of his eternal existence. It would make him quick to anger when disrespected. It would make him unable to forgive slights, real or perceived. It would make him hold grudges that lasted decades, that outlived the mortals who originally offended him, that sometimes seemed to take on lives of their own. But all of that was still to come. For now, Poseidon was simply growing, accumulating power, waiting for the moment when everything would change. And that moment, as it happened, was approaching faster than Cronus could have imagined. Because while Poseidon and his siblings waited in darkness or in hiding, a sixth child was being born. A child named Zeus, who would refuse to be swallowed, who would grow strong in secret, and who would one day return to set everything in motion. The world was about to change. The age of the Titans was ending, though they didn't know it yet. And Poseidon, born in fear and raised in either darkness or exile, was about to become one of the most powerful gods in existence, the Earthshaker, the Stormbringer, Lord of the Seas. But first, he needed to be freed. The liberation and the titanomachy Zeus came back to Cronus not as a conquering hero, not with armies or thunder, but as a cupbearer, a servant, someone so beneath notice that he could move through the halls of power invisible, just another face among the many who attended the Titan King. It was a perfect disguise, the kind of plan that only works because the powerful rarely look at the powerless, because tyrants become so convinced of their own security that they stop checking for threats. It was Gaia, their grandmother, ancient and knowing, who helped him. Earth herself, who had existed before the Titans, before Cronus, before the structure of the cosmos had taken its current form. She had grown tired of Cronus's reign, tired of seeing her grandchildren trapped or hidden, tired of the fear that had replaced whatever order Cronus had originally promised. She wanted change, and she was willing to help make it happen. The potion she gave Zeus was ancient, bitter, and irresistible. It was made from herbs that didn't grow in gardens, from compounds that existed at the boundaries of existence, from the kind of knowledge that only Earth herself possessed. When mixed with wine, it was undetectable. When consumed, it was unstoppable. It would make Cronus's body reject everything he had swallowed, bring it all back up, release what should never have been imprisoned in the first place. Zeus waited for his moment. He watched Cronus, learned his habits, understood his routines. He saw how the Titan King lived in his palace, surrounded by lesser titans and sycophants, convinced of his own security because he believed all his children were either trapped inside him or safely hidden where they couldn't threaten him. Cronus had forgotten the fundamental rule of tyranny, that the oppressed always, eventually, find a way to strike back. When Zeus finally served the poisoned wine, Cronus drank without hesitation. Why wouldn't he? He was king of the cosmos. Who would dare poison him? Who would even think to try? He raised the cup, drank deeply, and felt nothing unusual at first. Just good wine, smooth and warming. Then his body rebelled. It started with a cough, then a retch, then with a sound that echoed across the cosmos like thunder rolling through a canyon, like mountains being born, like the earth itself crying out. Cronus vomited up his children. First came the stone he had swallowed instead of Zeus, the rock that Rhea had wrapped in swaddling clothes and presented as her youngest son. It hit the ground with a thud that made the earth tremble, rolling to a stop at Zeus's feet. That stone would later be set up at Delphi as a monument, a reminder of Rhea's deception and Cronus's credulity. But in that moment, it was just the beginning. Then came Poseidon. Imagine emerging from that darkness. Imagine being born twice, first into the world as an infant, then into freedom as a fully grown god. Poseidon came forth with all the power that had accumulated during those years, however many years they were. Time worked strangely in Cronus's belly. It might have been decades. It might have been centuries. However long it was long enough for Poseidon to grow into his full divine strength, long enough for him to understand exactly what had been done to him. His first breath of free air must have tasted like salt and storm, like every ocean he would one day command. His first sight of the world, with its open sky and endless horizons, must have seemed both impossibly beautiful and dangerously vast after so long in darkness. He stood, taller than mortal men, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of storms, with eyes the color of deep water, and looked around at a world he'd been denied since birth. After Poseidon came the others. Hades emerged, dark and silent, blinking in the light like someone coming out of a cave, taking in the world with those shadowed eyes that would one day see every dead soul that ever existed. Hera came forth, furious and magnificent, already calculating the revenge she would take not on her father, that would be Zeus's job, but on anyone who dared to think her imprisonment had made her weak. Demeter, still thinking of the earth she'd been denied, of the growing things she'd never seen, of the seasons she should have been shepherding. Hestia, calm as always, but with an edge now, a hardness born of patience tested beyond all reasonable limits. They stood together, the 6 children of Cronus, and looked at their father, the king of the Titans, the lord of time, reduced to coughing and stumbling, weakened by the potion and the shock of losing his prisoners. He was still powerful, still dangerous, still capable of fighting them. But for the first time in his reign, he looked vulnerable. For the first time, his children saw him as something they could actually defeat. They could have killed him then. Perhaps they should have. It would have been cleaner, quicker, would have prevented what came next. But that's not what they did. Because killing him outright would have been too simple. It wouldn't have proven anything. It wouldn't have shown the other Titans, the ones who had watched Cronus rule and done nothing to stop him, that a new order was possible. Instead, they declared war. The Titanomachy. The name itself carries weight, like the echo of mountains falling, like the memory of a world being remade. It would last 10 years, a decade of warfare that made the earth groan and the sky weep. On one side stood Cronus and most of the Titans, ancient beings of immense power who had shaped the world from chaos, who embodied fundamental forces of existence. On the other stood the young gods, Zeus and his siblings, burning with the fury of the wronged and the energy of youth. Poseidon was no minor player in this war. Where Zeus hurled lightning and Hades walked unseen, Poseidon brought the water, not gentle rains or calm seas, but tsunamis that could swallow armies, floods that could reshape coastlines, and storms that turned day into night. He was learning his power even as he used it, discovering the breadth of his domain, the depth of his strength, understanding that he didn't just control water, but could command it, shape it, make it do things that defied natural law. He learned that he could strike the earth and cause it to shake, that earthquakes answered to him as readily as waves did, that the boundary between sea and land was less fixed than most believed, that with enough power and will, he could blur that line, bring the ocean onto the land or open chasms that swallowed the sea. He earned his title during those years, Earthshaker, not just because he could cause earthquakes, but because he could make the very foundations of existence tremble. But the war was not going well. For 3 years, then 5, then 8, the two sides clashed without clear victor. The Titans were too strong, too experienced, too deeply rooted in the fabric of reality. Every assault the young gods launched broke against the defenses of Mount Othrys like waves against a cliff. Every strategy Zeus devised, Cronus countered with the patience of someone who had ruled for millennia. Poseidon's floods could reshape battlefields, but they couldn't break the Titans' resolve. At night, when the fighting paused, when both sides withdrew to their strongholds to tend to wounds and plan the next day's battles, the stars seemed to flicker with fatigue. The world itself seemed tired of the conflict, worn down by years of divine warfare that cracked mountains and boiled seas. Something had to change. Someone had to break the stalemate. It was Zeus who had the idea, or perhaps it was Gaia again, whispering advice from the earth itself. Either way, Zeus descended into Tartarus, that pit beneath the underworld where even light feared to go, where even sound grew hesitant. There, in chains of unbreakable metal, imprisoned since the dawn of time, he found the Hecatonchires, 3 brothers with 100 arms and 50 heads each, and the Cyclopes, master craftsmen with a single eye in their foreheads. They had been imprisoned by Uranus back when he ruled, because he found them disturbing, too powerful, too strange, too unpredictable. When Cronus overthrew Uranus, he left them imprisoned, partly because he agreed they were dangerous, partly because freeing them would have required acknowledging that his father's fears might have been legitimate. So there they remained, in the dark, in chains, forgotten by everyone, except those who needed to remember that even gods could be imprisoned forever. Zeus freed them all. The Hecatonchires rose like mountains coming to life, their 100 arms flexing, their 50 heads turning in all directions at once, taking in the world they'd been denied for so long. The Cyclopes blinked their great single eyes and immediately understood what was happening. They were craftsmen. They understood the language of tools and weapons. They understood that sometimes, to change the world, you need the right equipment. And they understood that Zeus had just given them their freedom, which meant they owed him a debt. They offered to pay that debt in the only currency they knew: craftsmanship. For Zeus, they forged the thunderbolt, not a single bolt, but the power to call lightning from the sky itself, to turn the heavens into his arsenal, to make thunder his voice. For Hades, they crafted a helm of darkness, woven from shadow and fear, from the absence of light itself, that would make him invisible to God and mortal alike, that would let him move through the world unseen and unstoppable. And for Poseidon, they created the trident. It was not just a weapon. It was an extension of his power, a focus for his will, a symbol of everything he would become. 3 prongs, sharp as divine decree, sharp enough to pierce the veil between water and earth, between calm and storm, forged from metal that didn't exist in the mortal world, tempered in fires that burned hotter than the sun, cooled in waters deeper than any ocean. The Cyclopes worked their craft carefully, knowing that what they were making would last forever, would be wielded by a god, would help shape the future of existence. When they presented it to Poseidon, he took it and felt its weight. Not physical weight, though it had that too, but the weight of what it represented: power, authority, the ability to reshape the world according to his will. With this trident, he could shake the foundations of mountains. With it, he could call forth springs from solid rock or turn calm seas into maelstroms. With it, he could make the earth itself remember that it was once covered by water, that the ocean was older than the land, that everything eventually returns to the deep. The trident changed everything, not just because it was powerful, though it was, but because it gave Poseidon something he'd lacked before: a symbol, a weapon that was uniquely his, that marked him as Lord of the Seas as clearly as Zeus's lightning marked him as Lord of the Skies. When mortals saw the trident, they would know instantly who wielded it. When gods saw it, they would remember that Poseidon was not someone to be trifled with. Armed with these gifts from the Cyclopes, with the Hecatonchires throwing boulders with all 100 of their arms at once, the tide of war turned. The battles that followed were apocalyptic. Mountains split, their peaks falling like broken teeth. Rivers boiled from the heat of lightning strikes. The sea rose up and swallowed coastlines, then retreated, leaving deserts where there had been meadows. Fire rained from above while water surged from below. The world, newly made and still settling, groaned under the weight of divine fury. Poseidon fought like someone possessed, like someone who had years of rage to work through and finally had the means to do it. Every strike of his trident was the memory of being trapped in darkness. Every flood he unleashed was the fury of imprisonment. Every earthquake he caused was his way of saying that the old order, the order that had swallowed children and hidden them and denied them their birthright, was ending. He didn't just fight for victory. He fought for the right to exist, to be free, to never again be at someone else's mercy. Zeus hurled bolts that split mountains, that carved rivers into solid stone, that turned the sky itself into a weapon. Hades walked unseen through enemy camps, spreading fear and confusion, striking from shadows, making the Titans paranoid about what they couldn't see. The Hecatonchires created avalanches of stone that no defense could turn aside. Together, they were unstoppable. The Titans, powerful as they were, couldn't match this onslaught, couldn't match the fury of the young gods, couldn't match the strength of the Hecatonchires, couldn't match the weapons forged by the Cyclopes. One by one, they fell. Some were struck down in battle, their power finally overwhelmed. Others surrendered, choosing imprisonment over destruction. Still others fled into the far corners of the world, where they hoped the victors wouldn't find them or wouldn't bother to pursue. Cronus himself was the last to fall. Zeus confronted him atop Mount Othrys in the hall where Cronus had once ruled unchallenged, where he had sat on his throne and convinced himself that swallowing his children had been the right decision. The details of that final confrontation are lost to time, or perhaps deliberately forgotten. Some things are too personal, even in myth. What's known is that Zeus emerged victorious, and Cronus, beaten and bound in chains of unbreakable iron, was cast down into Tartarus along with most of his allies. The Titans who had sided with the young gods were spared. Themis, who embodied law and order, who had remained neutral throughout, was allowed to walk free and would later serve as Zeus's advisor. Prometheus, who had quietly aided Zeus with advice and warnings, who had seen which way the war would end and chosen the winning side, was also spared and would play important roles in later myths. They were reminders of the old world, living in the new one, proof that not all titans had supported Cronus's tyranny, but Cronus and those who had fought beside him were thrown into the deepest pit of the underworld, into Tartarus, that place beneath even Hades' realm, where darkness was absolute and hope didn't exist. There, behind walls of black adamantine metal, guarded by the Hecatonchires who had helped defeat them, they would remain for eternity, or at least until the next age of the world came to pass, which in the scope of divine time is more or less the same thing. Atlas, who had been the general of the Titan forces, the strategist who had nearly turned the tide of war several times, received special punishment. For his leadership, for his refusal to yield even when defeat was obvious, he was sentenced to stand at the edge of the world and hold up the sky itself on his shoulders. Not the earth, though the confusion is common and understandable. The sky, the endless weight of heaven pressing down on him forever, his arms trembling with the strain, his back bent under celestial burden. No rest, no relief, no forgiveness, just the weight, forever. With victory secured and their enemies defeated or imprisoned, the young gods stood atop Olympus and looked out at a world they now controlled. It was scarred from the war, smoking in places, flooded in others, with mountains in wrong places and rivers that had forgotten their courses. But it was theirs. They had fought for it. They had earned it. They had proven that the old order could be overthrown, that even divine tyranny could be challenged and defeated. Now came the question that often follows victory. What next? How do you divide infinity? How do you share omnipotence? Who rules what? And how do you decide fairly when everyone involved is a god who just proved their power in a decade-long war? They cast lots. Whether this was Zeus's idea, attempting to be fair, or a mutual agreement among the three brothers who were clearly the most powerful, the stories don't specify. But Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew to determine who would rule which realm: the sky, the sea, and the underworld. 3 domains, each infinite in its own way, each requiring a different kind of power, each offering different kinds of rewards and challenges. Zeus drew the sky, the heavens themselves, the clouds and rain, the lightning and wind, the air that covered the world. He would rule from Olympus, the highest peak, where mortals couldn't reach without divine help, and lesser gods had to crane their necks to see. It was, by all accounts, the best of the 3 lots, the most visible, the most glorious, the most obviously powerful. The sky was what everyone saw. It was above everything. Zeus's kingdom would be the one that loomed over all others, literally and figuratively. Poseidon drew the sea, every ocean, every sea, every river and stream and drop of salt water in the world. It was a realm as vast as Zeus's, perhaps vaster if you measured by volume rather than visibility. But it was hidden beneath waves. He would rule from a palace deep underwater, where sunlight faded to blue and then to black, where pressure could crush mountains and creatures swam that had never seen the surface and never would. It was powerful, certainly. Vital to civilization, absolutely. But it was also lonely. The sea is beautiful from above, but beneath its surface it's mostly cold and dark and quiet. Hades drew the underworld, the realm of the dead, where every mortal soul eventually traveled, where shadows walked and memories faded and nothing ever changed because change requires life. It was, without question, the worst of the three lots. Not because it lacked power. Hades would rule more subjects than any other god. Every human who had ever lived eventually ended up in his kingdom. But because none of them would choose to be there, none of them would be happy. None of them would worship him with joy. It was a kingdom of necessity, not desire, and Hades, quiet and solemn, accepted it without complaint because someone had to, and the lots had spoken. The earth was left neutral ground, shared by all. The gods could walk it, mortals could live on it, but no one could claim complete dominion over it. This seemed fair at the time. It would cause problems later, territorial disputes and conflicts over which god had rights to which places. But in the moment, with the war just ended and victory still fresh, it seemed like a reasonable compromise. Poseidon took his trident, newly forged and still humming with power, and descended beneath the waves. He swam down past where the light penetrated, past where normal fish could survive, down to the abyssal plains where the water was thick and dark and heavy with pressure. There, in that realm of eternal darkness, he would build his palace. There, he would make his kingdom. There, he would become not just a god of water, but the god of the sea itself, the earth shaker, the storm bringer, the one whom sailors would pray to in their terror and their hope. The war was over. The Titans were defeated. The cosmos had been divided. But Poseidon's story, his long tale of rage and power and love and loss, was only beginning. Building his kingdom and finding his queen. Poseidon's palace was said to be at the bottom of the sea, though which sea the stories never quite agreed on. Some placed it in the Aegean, others in the Mediterranean's darkest trenches, still others in the Atlantic beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Perhaps it was in all of them, shifting through the waters of the world like a whale migrating with seasons. The stories leave room for mystery. What they do agree on is that the palace was magnificent, built of gold and coral, pearl and precious stones that glowed with their own light in the darkness. The walls were woven from the bones of ancient sea creatures, or perhaps from calcium deposits of countless coral generations. The floors were smooth as glass, reflecting light from bioluminescent creatures that drifted past like living stars. In the great hall, the ceiling curved like the inside of a wave, forever frozen at the moment before it breaks. Schools of fish swam through the rooms as freely as birds through air. Dolphins played in the corridors. Whales sang their deep songs that echoed like music, like poetry, like prayers in a language older than Greek. Poseidon's throne was carved from black rock dredged up from the deepest trench, cold to touch, always. On its back were carved scenes of the Titanomachy, of Poseidon striking the earth with his trident, of waves rising higher than mountains. It was both celebration and warning. He held his trident even when seated, its three prongs glinting in the phosphorescent light. With it, he could summon currents from still water, call storms from clear skies, strike the ocean floor, and send tremors racing through the earth. It was never far from his hand. But for all its splendor, the palace was empty. There were servants, nymphs, and minor sea gods, Nereids who sang ancient songs, Tritons who blew horns of shell. The palace was populated, but it wasn't full. There was no queen, no equal to share his throne, his power, his long immortal life. Poseidon was discovering what many who achieve power discover. That victory doesn't bring happiness. That ruling alone is different from ruling alongside someone who understands that even gods can be lonely. He was also learning the nature of his domain. The sea was not like the sky. It had its own will, its own moods. Poseidon didn't rule the sea so much as he negotiated with it, channeled it, understood it well enough to anticipate its movements. This required patience, which he didn't naturally possess. His temper didn't help. When sailors forgot tribute, he sent storms. When cities grew proud, he sent earthquakes. When someone disrespected the sea, his response was swift and devastating. But he could be generous too. Sailors who honored him found safe passage. Coastal people who made offerings woke to full nets. Heroes who earned his respect received gifts beyond measure. The unpredictability was part of his power. Mortals never knew which Poseidon they would encounter. The uncertainty kept them careful, kept them making offerings even when seas were calm. But even gods tire of uncertainty in their own lives. Poseidon wanted stability. He wanted someone who could match his strength and temper his storms. He wanted, though he might not have phrased it this way, someone to make his palace feel like a home. He would find her at Naxos, that sun-bright island where grapes grew sweet. Or perhaps it was Crete. The sources disagree on location, but agree on essentials. Poseidon surfaced from the deep and saw something that stopped him completely. The Nereids were dancing. All 50 of them, daughters of Nereus, the old man of the sea. They were known for their beauty and grace, for sweet singing voices, for kindness to sailors in distress. They danced at the tide line, feet creating patterns that disappeared with each wave. They sang songs older than memory. Among them was Amphitrite. She wasn't the most famous Nereid. That honor belonged to Thetis, who would mother Achilles. But when Poseidon saw Amphitrite, none of the others existed. There was only her. What made her different, the stories struggle to say. Perhaps something in her eyes, a depth that reflected the ocean itself. Perhaps the way she laughed, genuine and free. Perhaps Poseidon was simply ready to see what he needed to see. He emerged from the waves suddenly, water rising with him. The Nereids froze. Poseidon was impossible to ignore. He stood taller than mortal men, with shoulders broad enough to carry storms. His hair was the color of deep water, his beard thick and wild, and he held his trident, always the trident. The Nereids bowed, all except Amphitrite, who simply stared. Poseidon smiled, and the world shifted to accommodate him. He told her he had been watching, that among all her sisters she caught his eye, that he wanted her to be his wife, his queen, the lady of the sea who would rule beside him. This was, by divine standards, almost courteous. Gods don't usually ask. But Poseidon was trying to do this properly. He was extending an invitation, offering a partnership, acknowledging that Amphitrite had a choice. Amphitrite looked at him, at his trident, at the water churning around his feet, at her frozen sisters. And then she did something that surprised everyone. She ran. She dove into the waves and swam away with the speed of someone born to water. East, then south, then beyond geography, until she reached the edge of the world where Atlas stood holding up the sky. There, in cold waters at the world's end, she hid. Why did she run? Perhaps she feared his power, what it meant to tie herself to someone so volatile. Perhaps she valued her freedom too much. Perhaps she had seen something in his eyes, a hunger or need that frightened her. Or perhaps she simply didn't want to marry him. Whatever her reason, she fled, and Poseidon was left standing on the beach, watching her disappear. He could have forced her, could have commanded currents to carry her back. But he didn't. Instead, he sent messengers, sea turtles with ancient wisdom, flying fish who covered vast distances, whales whose songs carried for miles. One by one, they found her and delivered messages. Poseidon wished to speak with her. Poseidon desired her as queen. Poseidon promised honor, respect, power. One by one, they returned without her. She had listened politely. She had thanked them, and she had refused. No, she told them. Tell your lord I am honored, but no. The sea grew rougher as Poseidon's frustration mounted. Ships reported unusual storms. Sailors told stories of waves rising from calm water. But the storms continued, and Amphitrite stayed hidden, and the palace remained empty. Then Poseidon sent Delphinus, a dolphin god, clever and persuasive, with genuine affection for both Poseidon and the Nereids. He was the perfect mediator. He understood Poseidon's loneliness and power, but he also understood why Amphitrite might fear becoming queen. Delphinus swam to the world's end and found Amphitrite in those frigid depths where sunlight never penetrated. She was alone, and she was, Delphinus noted, miserable. Free, yes, but lonely, isolated, living in self-imposed exile because she was afraid. What Delphinus said, the sources don't record in detail. Perhaps he spoke of Poseidon's loneliness, of the palace that echoed with emptiness. Perhaps he described the honor of being queen, the good she could do. Perhaps he simply pointed out that hiding at the world's end was no way to live. But more likely, Delphinus acknowledged her fears, validated them, agreed that yes, Poseidon was volatile and powerful, but pointed out that she had power too, that gods could learn, could change, especially when they cared about someone. Whatever he said, it worked. Slowly, reluctantly, Amphitrite agreed to return, not to submit, but to give Poseidon a chance, to meet him again and decide with clearer eyes whether this was a future she could accept. The journey back took time. Amphitrite didn't rush. As they traveled, the sea began to calm. Storms faded. Waves eased. It was as if the ocean knew she was returning and was relieved. When they reached Poseidon's palace, he was waiting, not on his throne, but outside, in the water, looking less terrible and more tired than she remembered. He had learned something during her absence. That power doesn't equal persuasion, that you can't force someone to love you, that sometimes you have to earn what you want most. They talked. For hours, perhaps days. Amphitrite asked questions about his expectations, his temper, his kingdom, about what being queen would mean, what freedoms she would keep, about his fidelity, whether she would have to compete for attention. Poseidon answered as honestly as he could. Yes, he had a temper. Yes, he could be volatile. No, he couldn't promise perfection. But he could promise to try, that he wanted a partner, not a possession, that he had waited for her, had sent messengers instead of commands. Eventually, with the wariness of someone taking a calculated risk, Amphitrite agreed. She would marry him. She would be his queen. She would try to make this work. The wedding was magnificent. All the gods attended. Zeus came from Olympus. Hades emerged from the underworld. The Nereids sang, all 49 sisters, their voices creating harmonies that made water shimmer. Sea creatures of every kind circled in celebration. Dolphins leaped, whales sang, even sharks circled at respectful distances. Aphrodite gave Amphitrite a crown of roses, red as blood or desire, woven from flowers that shouldn't exist underwater, but did because Aphrodite willed it. It was both blessing and acknowledgement. Amphitrite was no longer just a Nereid. She was a queen. Poseidon, for his part, showed gratitude to Delphinus by placing the dolphin's likeness among the stars, creating the constellation Delphinus. There it would remain forever, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come through patience, not force. Amphitrite took her place beside Poseidon on that throne of black rock, wearing her crown of impossible roses. The palace, for the first time since it was built, felt full. The throne room echoed not with loneliness, but with life, with potential, with the promise of something better. They would have children. Triton, their son, half man and half fish, who would blow a horn of shell to announce his father's coming. Rhode, who would become patron goddess of roads. Benthesachime, whose name meant deep wave, representing the sea's calm maternal aspects. Chemopelea, embodying violent storms, who would marry Briareus the Hecatonchires. The family they built would be complicated. Poseidon would not be faithful, and this was expected. He would have affairs with nymphs and mortals, would father children across the Greek world. But Amphitrite, unlike Hera, didn't respond with constant fury. Perhaps she had never expected fidelity. Perhaps she understood that Poseidon's nature, like the sea itself, couldn't be contained. She was queen of the sea. She ruled beside him, not beneath him. When sailors prayed for safe passage, they prayed to both. When cities made offerings, they honored both names. Amphitrite brought grace and mercy to Poseidon's chaotic power. Where he might destroy, she might spare. Where he might rage, she might calm. They balanced each other, sea god and sea queen, storm and stillness. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. The palace became more than a monument to power. It became a home. The contest for Athens. Long before Athens was Athens, before it became the jewel of Greece, birthplace of democracy and philosophy, it was just a city called Cecropia, named after King Cecrops, half man and half snake. The city had potential. Everyone could see that. Natural harbor, access to water, fertile land, and the Acropolis, a high, rocky hill perfect for temples and fortresses. With the right patron deity, Cecropia could become magnificent, and potential attracts divine attention. Poseidon wanted the city. Every major Greek city was coastal. The sea was the highway of the ancient world. And Poseidon, as god of the sea, felt he had natural claim to any settlement that depended on maritime trade. He had been watching Cecropia grow from its earliest days. He'd seen people learn to fish, build better boats, develop trade routes. They knew to honor him, made appropriate offerings, built modest shrines. Surely, he thought, they would want him as their patron. Without his blessing, their ships would sink, their harbor would silt up, their future would be struggle. But Poseidon wasn't the only god interested. Athena, goddess of wisdom, war, and crafts, had also been watching the city with keen interest. She saw different potential. Where he saw maritime power, she saw cultural center. Where he saw ships and trade, she saw artisans and philosophers. This city could prove that wisdom was more valuable than raw power. They might have fought over it directly, god against god, until the city was flattened in the process. But Zeus suggested an alternative, a contest, a competition to see which god could offer the greater gift. Whichever present the people valued more, that god would become their patron. Poseidon went first. He strode up the Acropolis with his trident gleaming, making the air smell of salt and storm. The people gathered at respectful distance. He raised his trident high, then brought it down, striking rocky ground with force that made the hill tremble. Where the trident struck, rocks split open and water began to pour. The people gasped. Creating water from rock was impressive, clearly divine power. Water meant life, sustainability. The city would never have to depend entirely on wells or rainfall. This was no small gift. There was one problem. The water was salty. Seawater, Springing from solid rock on a hilltop, Poseidon had demonstrated power, created something from nothing. But the something wasn't useful. You can't drink seawater. You can't water crops with it. You can't do any of the 1,000 things humans need fresh water for. It was powerful, dramatic, impressive, but not practical. In some versions, Poseidon also gave them a horse. The first horse, created by striking the ground differently. Horses were precious in the ancient world. They meant transport, cavalry, prestige, military power. A gift of the first horse would have been tremendously valuable. But even if Poseidon offered both saltwater spring and horse, there remained the problem of Athena. When it was her turn to present her gift, she did something remarkable in its simplicity. She didn't arrive with thunder or fanfare. She simply appeared, walking up the Acropolis with calm grace. She carried her spear. She approached where Poseidon had struck. She knelt, showing respect for the people's judgment. She planted her spear in the earth, not violently, but firmly. Then she withdrew it, leaving a small hole. And from that hole, a tree began to grow. Not slowly, as trees normally do, but rapidly, supernaturally. A time lapse condensed into moments. Within minutes, a mature olive tree stood before the crowd, its silvery green leaves rustling, its branches heavy with fruit, its roots already deep in rocky soil. The people understood immediately. This wasn't just impressive magic. This was practical magic. An olive tree was a gift that kept giving, generation after generation. The fruit was nutritious. The oil had dozens of uses: cooking, lighting, medicine, cosmetics. The wood was strong and beautiful. Even the leaves had value. More than practical value, the olive tree was symbolic. Olives meant peace, because you can't grow them during constant warfare. They take years to mature, require stable communities. An olive tree represented civilization itself, choosing to cultivate rather than conquer. In giving them an olive tree, Athena was giving them a vision of what they could become. Not just maritime power, but center of culture, beacon of civilization, place where art and philosophy and democracy would flourish. The people deliberated. King Cecrops listened to both sides. Citizens debated. Everyone had opinions. Poseidon's gift had power, certainly. The sea was vital, but Athena's gift had utility that touched everyone. Rich or poor, everyone would benefit from olive trees. They could plant cuttings, create orchards, build an economy around olive oil. Moreover, Athena's gift suggested a different relationship between God and city. Poseidon's gift was about his power. Athena's gift was about their prosperity. After much deliberation, King Cecrops announced the decision. The people had chosen Athena. The city would bear her name, Athens. She would be its patron goddess, its protector. Temples would be built to her. Festivals would celebrate her. The Parthenon would crown the Acropolis in her name. Poseidon did not take this well. He was enraged beyond measure. He had offered them power, access to the sea, his personal favor, and they had rejected him. For a tree, for olive oil, for Athena's self-satisfied wisdom. They had chosen her over him, judged him, and found him wanting. He could have destroyed them, could have sent earthquakes and tsunamis and storms. But he didn't. Partly because destroying Athens would prove Athena right, partly because Zeus was watching, and partly because destroying Athens wouldn't undo the rejection. So instead of total destruction, he settled for lesser punishment. He flooded the Attic plain, the fertile land around Athens, not catastrophically, but enough to turn fields into swamps and make life harder. It was petty, vindictive, the divine equivalent of slashing someone's tires. The floods eventually receded. The Athenians adapted. Life continued, the city grew, and Athens went on to become exactly what Athena promised, a center of culture, learning, and civilization. The Athenians, being politically savvy, decided to honor Poseidon anyway. They built him a temple on the Acropolis, right next to Athena's. They made offerings, prayed to him before sea voyages, acknowledged that while Athena had won, Poseidon remained necessary. You can't build maritime culture while ignoring the god of the sea. The Erechtheion, built centuries later, was dedicated to both gods jointly. Inside, they maintained the saltwater spring, the marks where Poseidon's trident had struck. It wasn't worship exactly, more like diplomatic courtesy. Poseidon never quite forgave Athens. His enmity toward the city comes up again and again in later stories, a grudge that outlasted the original participants. The contest taught him that power isn't enough. That being necessary isn't the same as being chosen. That people will sometimes pick peace over power, wisdom over might. It was a humbling lesson, and Poseidon didn't enjoy humility or learn from it easily. It cemented his rivalry with Athena into something permanent. They would support opposite sides in the Trojan War. They would champion different heroes. They would argue in Olympus about matters great and small. And through it all, the olive tree grew on the Acropolis. When Persians burned it, it sprouted anew within days. When disasters struck, the tree survived or was immediately replanted. It stood as a permanent reminder that Athens had chosen wisdom over the sea, that Athena had won and Poseidon had lost. Some losses, even for gods, can never be undone. The many loves and countless children. Poseidon, like most Olympian gods, had a complicated relationship with fidelity. To call him unfaithful to Amphitrite would be accurate but insufficient. He treated marriage vows more as suggestions than binding agreements. Across Greece and the wider Mediterranean, wherever water touched land, Poseidon left his mark in the form of children. His affairs numbered in the dozens at minimum, probably hundreds counting every local tradition. He pursued goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women with equal enthusiasm and varying degrees of consent. The children born from these unions would shape Greek mythology profoundly, founding cities, slaying monsters, or becoming monsters themselves. One of his most famous affairs was with Medusa. This story is tragic and speaks to the darkest aspects of divine power. Medusa had been beautiful once, a priestess in Athena's temple, devoted to the goddess of wisdom, taking vows of chastity that should have protected her. Poseidon saw her and desired her. The sources phrase what happened next carefully, using euphemistic language. Some say he seduced her. Others are more honest. He forced himself upon her in Athena's sacred temple, violating both the woman and the sanctuary. Athena, discovering this desecration, was furious. But rather than punishing Poseidon, she punished Medusa. She transformed the priestess into a monster. Her beautiful hair became writhing serpents. Her face became so hideous that anyone who looked directly at it turned to stone. Medusa was cast out, exiled to a distant island, cursed for being violated, punished for being desirable. Years later, when Perseus killed Medusa by cutting off her head while she slept, something unexpected happened. From her blood, two beings emerged. Chrysaor, a warrior with golden sword, and Pegasus, the winged horse. Both were children of Poseidon, conceived during that assault, carried in Medusa's transformed body until her death. Pegasus especially would become famous, the flying horse that heroes rode, that symbolized inspiration and freedom. There's something deeply Greek about that, how even the worst actions of gods can create wonders, about how children, aren't responsible for their parents' crimes. But it's also a story about injustice, about how women in mythology so often bear consequences of male violence while perpetrators continue unchanged. Poseidon's relationship with his sister Demeter was equally problematic. When he pursued her, she tried to escape by transforming herself into a mare, hiding among a herd in Arcadia. It was a clever plan that usually works in myths, but Poseidon was the creator of horses. He knew their forms intimately. He simply transformed himself into a stallion and pursued her. The result of their union was Arion, a divine horse that could speak with human voice, run faster than wind, and understand languages of both gods and men. With Aethra, princess of Troezen, the story gets complicated by dual paternity. The night she conceived Theseus, she lay with both King Aegeus of Athens and Poseidon. Some versions say she slept with Aegeus, then waded into the sea, where Poseidon took her. The result was Theseus, claimed by both mortal and divine father, inheriting strength and cunning from both. Theseus would become one of Athens' greatest heroes. He would slay the Minotaur, unite Attica, establish democratic reforms. His connection to Poseidon gave him advantages. He could communicate with sea creatures, survive underwater. Once, when challenged to prove his divine parentage, he dove into the sea and was welcomed in Poseidon's palace. Amphitrite welcomed him with honor, treating her husband's bastard son with more grace than anyone deserved. Then there was Polyphemus, the Cyclops who lived in a cave and ate human travelers. Polyphemus was Poseidon's son by the nymph Thoosa. He was a monster, brutal and cruel, lacking in hospitality, practicing cannibalism. When Odysseus blinded him, Polyphemus called out to his father for vengeance, and Poseidon responded with full fury. He cursed Odysseus to wander the seas for 10 years, losing all ships and crew, suffering trial after trial. Why? Because Polyphemus was his son, and sons, even monstrous ones, deserved their father's protection. Orion was another son by the nymph Euryale. He became the greatest hunter in Greek mythology, so skilled he boasted he could kill every animal on earth. This hubris ended badly. Artemis killed him, either by accident or design. But Poseidon, grieving his son, placed him among stars where he hunts eternally, the constellation we still recognize today. There were countless others, Belus and Agenor, who founded dynasties, Nauplius, a renowned navigator, Neleus and Peleus, twins who would rule kingdoms, Triton, his son with Amphitrite, who became his herald, Rhode, who gave her name to Rhodes. Some of Poseidon's children were helpful to mortals, heroes who defended cities. But many were monsters themselves, giants who terrorized travelers, bandits who preyed on the weak, creatures that had to be slain by heroes. Poseidon's legacy was mixed. For every Theseus or Orion, there was a Polyphemus or a bandit using divine heritage as license for cruelty. The sheer number of children speaks to Poseidon's nature. He was a god of appetite as much as a god of water. He saw something he wanted and took it, whether city, woman, or satisfaction of his own desires. Consequences were for later. Children were someone else's problem, usually their mother's. He acknowledged offspring when it suited him, ignored them when it didn't, and occasionally destroyed those who opposed them, as with Odysseus. Amphitrite's tolerance of all this is remarkable. She didn't rage against every affair as Hera did with Zeus. She didn't transform lovers into monsters or curse children. For the most part, she maintained her dignity and her role as queen. Perhaps she had never expected fidelity. Perhaps she understood that Poseidon's nature, like the sea itself, couldn't be contained. Perhaps she had her own power, her own sense of self that didn't depend on her husband's attention. She was queen of the sea. She ruled beside him, not beneath him. When sailors prayed, they prayed to both. When cities offered, they honored both names. Amphitrite brought grace and mercy to Poseidon's chaotic power. There was one exception to her tolerance. Scylla had been a beautiful sea nymph who caught Poseidon's attention. Whether he acted on it, stories disagree. But Amphitrite, jealous or protective or simply tired of being patient, decided to eliminate the competition. She poisoned Scylla's bathing pool with magical herbs. When Scylla waded in, the transformation was horrific. Her lower body became a ring of serpent heads, 6 of them, each with triple rows of teeth. Her voice became a howl. She lost her mind to rage and hunger, becoming a monster who lived in a strait and snatched sailors from ships, devouring them alive. It was perhaps the cruelest thing Amphitrite ever did. It showed that even the queen of the sea, calm and merciful as she usually was, had limits. That tolerance doesn't mean acceptance, that even goddesses can be pushed too far. Poseidon, for his part, seemed to learn nothing. He continued his affairs, continued fathering children, continued treating marriage as arrangement rather than relationship. Perhaps divine nature is immutable, and gods of desire must desire. Or perhaps he was simply a bad husband, powerful and important, but ultimately selfish. His children scattered across the Greek world would carry his legacy forward, some with pride, others with shame. Some would honor him, building temples and offering sacrifices. Others would curse the day they learned their father was a god, but all carried his mark. The power of the sea ran in their veins. The temper of the earth shaker colored their natures. They were Poseidon's legacy, for good or ill, proof that even gods can't escape consequences. They just push them onto their children. Odysseus and the curse that lasted 10 years. Of all Poseidon's grudges, and there were many, none lasted longer or hurt more deeply than his vendetta against Odysseus. It began with an act of survival, escalated through pride, and ended in suffering that touched everyone around it. It showed both the best and worst of Poseidon's nature, his fierce protection of children, and his inability to know when enough was enough. The story begins with Odysseus returning home after 10 years fighting in the Trojan War. Odysseus was clever, blessed by Athena, respected by his men, desperate to return to Ithaca, where his wife Penelope and son Telemachus waited. He had every reason to believe the journey would be straightforward. Troy had fallen. The war was won. All that remained was the voyage home. But he made several mistakes, some unavoidable, others self-inflicted, and one created an enemy he could never escape. After leaving Troy, Odysseus and his 12 ships were blown off course. They wandered, visiting strange islands, losing men to various misadventures. Eventually, they came to an island inhabited by Cyclopes, giant one-eyed shepherds who lived in caves and had little use for the laws of hospitality that governed Greek society. Odysseus, being Odysseus, decided to explore. He took his best men and climbed to a large cave filled with sheep and cheese and milk. It belonged to Polyphemus, a cyclops, and though Odysseus didn't know it yet, a son of Poseidon. When Polyphemus returned and found uninvited guests in his cave, he was less than pleased. He blocked the entrance with a boulder too large for mortal men to move, trapping Odysseus and his crew inside. Then he started eating them. 2 men at a time, grabbing them like snacks, devouring them whole. It was horrific. These weren't deaths in battle. They were murders, casual and cruel, performed by a creature who saw humans as cattle. Odysseus, trapped and desperate, came up with a plan. He offered Polyphemus wine, strong, undiluted wine from Troy that hit the Cyclops like a hammer. When Polyphemus asked his name, Odysseus lied. He called himself Nobody, which seems strange until you see how clever it was. When Polyphemus passed out drunk, Odysseus and his men took a great stake of olive wood, hardened it in fire, and drove it into the Cyclops' single eye, blinding him. Polyphemus' screams brought other Cyclopes running. "Nobody is attacking me," Polyphemus shouted. "Nobody is killing me." The other Cyclopes, assuming he'd gone mad, left him alone. In the morning, still blind, Polyphemus had to let his sheep out to graze. He did so carefully, feeling each sheep's back as it passed. But Odysseus and his crew clung to the undersides of the sheep, escaping while the blinded giant felt above them. They made it back to their ships and began rowing away. They were safe. All Odysseus had to do was keep his mouth shut and row away into anonymous safety. But Odysseus had a flaw: pride. Hubris, the Greeks called it, that dangerous assumption that you're clever enough to taunt the powerful and get away with it. As his ship pulled away, Odysseus couldn't help himself. He shouted back to the blinded Cyclops. He mocked him. He revealed his true name. "If anyone asks who blinded you," he called across the water, "tell them it was Odysseus, sacker of cities, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca." It was spectacular stupidity, because Polyphemus, hearing his attacker's real name, immediately knew what to do. He called out to his father, to Poseidon, god of the sea, earth shaker, his divine parent who might actually answer his prayer. And Poseidon heard. Of course he heard. His son was screaming for vengeance, and the one responsible had not only blinded him but taunted him afterward, revealed his name and lineage with pride. Polyphemus prayed not for death, that would be too quick, but for suffering. He prayed that Odysseus would never reach home, and if he did, that it would be after many years, after losing all his men, on a stranger's ship, and that he would find chaos waiting. Poseidon granted that prayer, not immediately, not with a sudden storm that would have been almost merciful, but steadily, persistently, turning the remainder of Odysseus's journey into a decade-long nightmare that broke ships and men with equal indifference. After leaving the Cyclopes, Odysseus's troubles multiplied. He visited Aeolus, god of winds, who gave him a bag containing all adverse winds, leaving only favorable breezes. But his crew, suspicious and greedy, opened the bag while Odysseus slept, releasing the winds and blowing them backward. When they returned to Aeolus for help, he refused. The gods, he said, clearly opposed them. They sailed on and came to the Laestrygonians, giant cannibals who destroyed 11 of Odysseus's 12 ships, leaving only his own vessel. Hundreds of men died in minutes. Poseidon didn't cause this directly, but his curse created the circumstances, ensuring Odysseus sailed into danger after danger. At Circe's island, the sorceress transformed his men into pigs. Odysseus rescued them with Hermes' help, but spent a year on the island recovering, a year he couldn't afford. Circe sent him to the underworld to consult the prophet Tiresias. There, among the dead, Odysseus learned the truth. Poseidon's wrath was against him. The sea god would oppose his return until fury was satisfied. Tiresias advised him on how to appease Poseidon eventually, but that was cold comfort to a man who wanted to go home. They sailed past the sirens, those singers whose voices lured men to their deaths. Odysseus plugged his crew's ears with wax and had himself tied to the mast so he could hear their song without responding. It worked, but barely. Then came Scylla and Charybdis, two monsters guarding a narrow strait. Charybdis was a whirlpool that swallowed ships whole. Scylla was the six-headed monster Amphitrite had created. Odysseus had to choose which to face. He chose Scylla, knowing she would take 6 men, but the ship would survive. He never forgot their screams. They arrived at the island of Helios, god of the sun, who grazed sacred cattle there. They had been warned, do not touch the cattle. But hunger is powerful, and when Odysseus was away praying, his men slaughtered the cattle and feasted. Zeus, at Helios's insistence, destroyed their ship with a lightning bolt. Every man died except Odysseus, who clung to wreckage and drifted for days before washing ashore on Ogygia, the island of Calypso. There he remained for 7 years, held captive by the nymph who loved him. 7 more years away from home. Finally, Zeus intervened. Calypso was ordered to let Odysseus go. She gave him tools to build a raft and reluctantly watched him sail away. Poseidon, returning from visiting the Ethiopians, saw Odysseus on his raft and was furious. He raised a storm that tore the raft apart, waves higher than buildings. Odysseus survived only because Ino, a minor sea goddess, took pity and gave him her veil. He swam for 2 days before washing ashore on Scheria, more dead than alive. The Phaeacians found him, fed him, listened to his story. Their king provided a ship to finally take him home. They sailed while Odysseus slept, depositing him on Ithaca's shore at last after 20 years away. But Poseidon wasn't done. When the Phaeacian ship turned to return home, Poseidon turned it to stone in sight of their harbor, a warning for helping his enemy. Odysseus reached home, yes, but as Polyphemus had prayed. He arrived late, after losing all his men, on a stranger's ship, and found his house full of suitors trying to marry his wife. He had to fight to reclaim what was his. Poseidon's curse had worked. It extracted a price far beyond what blinding Polyphemus might have warranted. But that was Poseidon's nature. He didn't do proportional response. When angered, he stayed angry until fury burned itself out. And if mortals suffered, they should have thought of that before they crossed him. Eventually, Odysseus made peace with Poseidon. He traveled inland, carrying an oar until someone mistook it for a winnowing fan. There he made sacrifice to Poseidon. The god accepted, the curse was lifted, and Odysseus lived out his remaining years in Ithaca. But the damage was done. 10 years lost, hundreds dead, families destroyed. All because a blinded Cyclops prayed to his father, and that father was Poseidon, who never knew when to let go of his anger. It was both Poseidon's finest and worst moment. Finest because he protected his son, showed that divine parentage meant something. Worst because he couldn't distinguish between justice and revenge, because he made hundreds suffer for one man's crime. The story shows the god at his most human and inhuman. Human in his grief for his wounded son, inhuman in his willingness to destroy anything connected to that wound. It's a reminder that gods are not moral exemplars. They're forces of nature given personalities, and nature doesn't care about fairness. It simply is, powerful and terrible, and occasionally magnificent, but ultimately indifferent to human suffering. The legacy of the Earthshaker. Poseidon's influence stretched far beyond his own myths. As god of the sea, he touched every aspect of Greek civilization. Every coastal city owed him homage. Every naval victory was attributed to him. Every drought or earthquake bore his signature. He was woven into daily life in ways Zeus never was, because Zeus ruled from distant Olympus, while Poseidon ruled from waters that touched every shore. His symbols became iconic. The trident, that 3-pronged spear, marked him instantly. Horses, sacred to him in ways that seemed odd for a sea god, but made sense when you understood their connection to waves and foam. Bulls, representing masculine power and strength. Dolphins, his messengers, sacred creatures that couldn't be harmed without incurring wrath. His temples dotted the Mediterranean coastline. The greatest was probably at Cape Sunion, on the southern tip of Attica, where the temple stood on a cliff visible to ships far out to sea. Sailors would see it and know they were near Athens, know they were being watched by the god. They would offer quick prayers of thanks if arriving, prayers of protection if departing. The Isthmian Games, held at Corinth, were second only to the Olympics in prestige. They honored Poseidon every 2 years, with athletic contests, horse racing, and offerings that made the sea god's sanctuary one of the richest in Greece. Worship of Poseidon often involved blood sacrifice. Bulls were common, but also horses, which must have been difficult for communities that depended on them. The sacrifice of a horse was a statement, proof that the community valued Poseidon's favor more than their most valuable animal. Before major sea voyages, extensive ceremonies honored Poseidon. Wine was poured into the sea. Animals were sacrificed. Priests inspected omens, reading the future in the way victims fell, in the color of their organs. Sailing against Poseidon's favor was considered suicidal. Fishermen had their own rituals, smaller and more personal. A splash of wine before casting nets, a prayer in the dawn light, a promise to honor him if the catch was good. These weren't grand temple ceremonies, but everyday acknowledgments that the sea wasn't neutral territory. It belonged to someone, and that someone expected recognition. In Roman culture, when they adopted Poseidon as Neptune, some things changed. Neptune was calmer, more controlled, less volatile. The Romans preferred their gods orderly and their worship official. Neptune received honors, certainly, but more as a patron of the navy than as a temperamental force of nature. But in the Greek understanding, Poseidon was never entirely tame. His symbols reflected this. The trident was a weapon before it was a scepter. The horses he created were wild before they were broken. The sea he ruled was dangerous before it was useful. Every symbol associated with him carried double meaning: power that could help or harm, beauty that could become terror, calm that could become storm in moments. Understanding his symbols means understanding the Greek relationship with the sea. It wasn't romantic. It was necessary, but frightening, useful, but deadly. The source of prosperity and the source of grief. Poseidon embodied all of that. His trident could bring water or earthquakes. His horses could carry you or trample you. His sea could feed you or drown you. He was the god you needed, but wished you didn't. The power you honored out of fear and respect in equal measure. Looking at Poseidon across all these stories, patterns emerge. He was powerful, but not supreme. Necessary, but not loved. Respected, but not trusted. He embodied the sea in human form. Beautiful, terrible, unpredictable, and ultimately indifferent to human concerns, unless those concerns affected him directly. His temper was legendary, not explosive like Ares, whose rage burned hot and fast. Poseidon's anger was like the sea itself, deep, patient, capable of sudden storms, but also of sustained pressure that wore away coastlines over centuries. When he held grudges, he held them completely. When he forgave, which was rare, he did so with the same intensity with which he'd hated. His pride was equally notable. The contest for Athens hurt him, not just because he lost, but because mortals had judged him and found him wanting. They had chosen wisdom over power, peace over strength, civilization over raw natural force. Every temple built to Athena in Athens was a reminder of that judgment. Every olive tree was a testament to his failure, yet he could be generous. Heroes who honored him properly received gifts beyond measure. Cities that worshipped him found their harbors safe and their fleets protected. He was capable of love, even if he expressed it poorly. His pursuit of Amphitrite showed patience eventually. His protection of children, even monstrous ones like Polyphemus, showed loyalty. His relationship with his brothers defined much of his identity. Zeus was king of gods, ruler of Olympus, thrower of lightning. Hades was lord of the underworld, keeper of the dead. Poseidon was the sea god, powerful certainly, important, absolutely, but always third in a hierarchy of three, always aware that he'd drawn the middle lot, neither sky nor underworld, but the realm in between. This created resentment, not constant, not consuming, but present like the taste of salt that never quite leaves your mouth when you live by the sea. Poseidon knew he was Zeus's equal in power, but not in authority. Knew that mortals prayed to Zeus first and him second. Knew that when gods gathered on Olympus, Zeus sat highest and he sat lower. His realm suited him, though. The sea was vast, larger than the land the other gods squabbled over. It was mysterious, largely unexplored, full of creatures and depths no mortal would ever see. It was his in ways that Zeus's sky wasn't purely Zeus's, but the deep sea, the trenches and abysses where Poseidon's palace stood, those were his alone. The sea also reflected his nature perfectly, calm one moment, violent the next, nurturing and deadly, beautiful and terrible, source of life and source of death. You couldn't look at the Mediterranean, couldn't watch waves crash against rocks or spread across sand, couldn't see sun sparkle on water or storms darken the horizon, without understanding something essential about Poseidon. He was a god of boundaries, not just the boundary between land and sea, though that obviously, but also the boundary between civilized and wild. Cities needed the sea for trade, food, communication. But the sea was fundamentally wild, fundamentally dangerous. You could build harbors and ships and navigation charts, but you couldn't truly control the ocean. It did what it wanted, when it wanted. Poseidon enforced those boundaries. He punished those who forgot them, who sailed without proper offerings, who treated the sea as conquered territory. He rewarded those who remembered, who stayed humble, who understood that every voyage was permission, not right. His children inherited aspects of his nature. Some were civilized, like Theseus, who founded institutions. Others were wild, like Polyphemus, who lived in a cave and ate travelers. Both were his sons. Both carried his mark. Poseidon created heroes and monsters with equal ease. His marriage to Amphitrite showed his capacity for partnership, even if complicated by infidelities. She tempered his worst impulses, provided stability to his chaos, gave him something beyond power and rage to define himself. Their children were less monstrous than many of his bastards, less violent, less troubled. Family had civilizing effects, but he never quite settled into domesticity. He was always seeking something more, someone else, some new experience or conquest. Perhaps this restlessness came from his imprisonment as a child. Perhaps it was simply his nature, the need to move like water needs to move, to explore and spread and never be still. The Greeks understood him because they understood the sea. They knew it could feed them and kill them. They knew it was beautiful and terrifying. They knew you couldn't trust it, but couldn't live without it. Poseidon wasn't a metaphor for the sea. He was the sea, made conscious and divine, given personality and power. worshipped and feared in equal measure. When storms came, sailors prayed to him. When earthquakes struck, cities made offerings. When droughts dried the land, communities begged for rain. Poseidon's favor meant prosperity. His wrath meant destruction. And everyone who lived near water understood that his moods, like the sea's moods, were unpredictable. So close your eyes now and let the sound of distant waves carry you away. Let the stories of the earthshaker settle over you like foam on sand. Remember that gods, for all their power, are just stories we tell to make sense of forces we can't control. The sea will rise and fall, whether we pray to Poseidon or not. But perhaps, just perhaps, there's comfort in believing that behind the waves, there's a personality. That the sea isn't random chaos, but the will of a god who, for all his flaws, at least cares enough to be angry or kind. Sleep now, and let the myths fade into dreams. And if you found peace in these old stories, remember to like and subscribe. Not for me, but because it helps others find their way here too. To this quiet place where ancient gods whisper across the centuries, where the earthshaker rests in his palace of gold and coral, where Amphitrite keeps watch over the endless sea, where mortals and immortals alike are just stories, and stories are all we need to fall asleep. Good night.